Thank you. Well, good evening. I'd like to start off by just giving you a little bit of background of my political career and my environmental sort of awareness, let's say. My interest in the very broad sense of politics started when I was about 14, when I became aware of all the social injustices that I saw around me in school and, of course, socially. I became interested in, obviously, human rights and things like that. So when I went to study in the university in UK, I followed that on through the student union, and that carried forward into my workplace when I became a very active trade unionist for many, many years. And in 1970, a general election was called in the UK. I was only 17, so I couldn't vote. But I decided that I would take it upon myself to read all the manifestos. And I decided that the party that best matched my ideas was the Liberal Party. In the next general election was called in 1974, and I was able to vote at that time. I thought, again, that I should take the time and trouble to read the manifestos again, just in case I'd made a mistake. But I actually decided that my original decision that I made was the right one, and the Liberal Party was the one I gave my vote to. And I have, in fact, been a Liberal for most of my adult life. My personal interest in environmental issues didn't actually start until the mid-70s, and it was mainly triggered by Greenpeace. They launched an expedition to prevent the massacre of pups, seal pups, in Newfoundland. And this was followed by the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, which some of you may remember, who organised an anti-nuclear demonstration in London in October 1983. I then decided to read more about it, and I found information on Friends of the Earth, which I think, in my opinion, covered all the areas that I was interested in. I decided to return to Gibraltar with my family in 1987, and I entered frontline politics in the 90s. And I must say that at that time, environment and environmental issues really wasn't spoken very much about. It is true to say that there were many individuals locally that had been raising their concerns on environmental matters since the 70s, and many of them had in fact been members of Greenpeace and CND and Friends of the Earth. So it wasn't that I just came here and there was no one. There were many people who were interested in that. I suppose that I would say that environmental issues became more of a public interest through an awareness, through politically by myself in ILF and the Reform Party, but also with an NGO, the Environmental Safety Group, or the ESG, who launched in 2000 at the same time. Thankfully, the environment is now on the general political agenda, and I think that the public, particularly the youth, now understand the importance that it has for us all. I left frontline politics in 2004, and in 2005 I founded the local branch of Friends of the Earth, and I suppose I must have stayed as coordinator until about 2009, 2010. In May 2011, I rejoined the local Liberal Party executive, where I still am. I would classify myself politically now as a Green, or Liberal Green I should say, and I am affiliated to the Green Liberal Democrats in the UK. During all these past years, both in and out of politics, I have observed how the various governments have always prioritised anything related to finances, legislation, practices that affects the finance centre, gaming companies, passport insurance, high net worth individuals and so on, has been upgraded to meet all the standards required by the UK and Europe. And of course this is very necessary because it is a vital part of our economy, and I would say one of the pillars of our economy. Unfortunately, it does mean that other areas of equal importance are left lagging behind. For example, we have a Town Planning Act of 1999, a building development control plan of 2001, a development plan of 2009, which is not quite enshrined in law, but it's more of a guide. It would be wrong of me to say that nothing has changed, because there have, of course, been amendments and improvements over the years, and I'm sure that we will see some more in the future. One of these specific areas which have been improved is the fact that we now have a DPC with open plan meetings that the public can attend to. And also, I'm sure that when the new Town Planning Act is enacted, a lot of the current issues will be dealt with by it. Another one of the acts being reviewed at the moment, which I understand will be imminent, that's the Heritage Act. I do believe that a lot has been achieved locally with regards to environmental matters since 2011, particularly because of the Minister John Cortes, who is a long-standing environmentalist and was a very active NGO before entering politics. He is really committed to a green environmental agenda, and he has a team of very highly qualified specialist staff working with him. I have seen great improvements everywhere. One example, again, is that there is a heritage and environmental filter. So any decisions taken has to go through these two filters to see what impact it will have in these areas. As they say, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it takes time to change systems, but more importantly, attitudes. And I know that these are being currently reviewed, and the changes are trying to be made in the various departments and ministries. Patience is not one of my virtues, it never has been, so I would like to see things done yesterday, but as I said, it takes time to implement a lot of legislation and changes that are required. I'm here tonight because I wanted to highlight two specific things. The first is the amount of developments, the type of developments, and the developers themselves. And of course, the second is the number of vehicles in Gibraltar, which has been touched upon. Gibraltar needs inward investment and developments in order to strengthen the economy. And I think it is right for government to encourage this, as ultimately a strong economy means that we will our quality of life will be improved with things such as housing, education, healthcare, and so on. But I do think that we should have a long-term development plan for Gibraltar, which clearly identifies areas for development. Marinas that will always be marinas, sea area that will be potentially for reclamation of land, green and open areas, and so on. In other words, a long-term vision beyond the 4-year terms of any government, a safeguard. Gibraltar has little available land or sea that we can reclaim, and in order to progress, unfortunately, we will have to build upwards rather than outwards. But in doing so, we need to take care of how we go about this. We need to ensure that the developments have the infrastructure required, and also that the developers take into consideration the quality of life of the people living around. I would say that developers and architects need to think more outside the box and come up with more sustainable buildings. A lot more thought is needed on the materials used in these buildings and their suitability to our local weather. For example, the type of glass used in buildings, the distances between the buildings, is natural ventilation being looked at or provided for, or will there be a need for an increased fuel consumption as the demand for air conditioning is required? Developers seek to maximize their profits, and therefore they want to use every possible inch of land, which of course on our rock is at a premium. But why not incorporate, for example, indoor gardens or green roofs? I believe that governments around the world should be encouraging investments in high-performance green building using energy efficiency measures that will reduce the impact of climate change, it will improve business performance, and will preserve and provide quality of life for us all. And I believe that Gibraltar could and should be a showcase of high-performance green buildings. Developers need to understand, because I think sometimes they think that they can't make money out of it, that huge profits can be made with green buildings and their business will improve. Commercial owners, operators and tenants will see tangible economic benefits long-term, obviously, such as improved comfort, lower operating costs, healthier environmental quality. Lower energy use, for example, will give them a competitive edge and will also increase the return on their investment when they build it. I mean, we have a specific problem in Gibraltar with damp, particularly in the older buildings. And many people locally have health issues which are related to this. But through the use of moisture control detailing measures, pollution and contamination rejection strategies, and providing well thought out natural ventilation procedures, the buildings would be healthier for its occupants. By building green or greening existing buildings, the value of the properties will increase and the liability risk will be reduced. And I'd just like to give you some examples of some green buildings. For example, in the German Reichstag Parliament, they have a glass dome there, and their building system, the energy system, is based upon a mix of solar energy, geothermal power, combined heat and power, biofuel generators, and innovative ventilation. Basically, in the summer, the geothermal installation cools the buildings in the summer and provides heat in the winter. And their emissions, the annual CO2 emissions, are reduced from 7,000 to less than 1,000 tons. So, it makes a big difference. There is a housing project in Australia called K2, and these are the most environmental sustainable public housing development in Australia. The apartment complex uses only renewable energy and has a lifespan up to 200 years. It is made partially of recycled timber and employs rainwater harvesting, grey water reuse, solar water heating, and photovoltaic panels. According to the government statistics, their apartments use 55% less electricity, 46% less gas, and 53% less water than conventional apartments. The Al Bahar Towers in Abu Dhabi were built with a sort of very thin sort of sheath of glass, obviously not appropriate for 120 degrees Fahrenheit that it can become in summer. So what the architects did was they created what they call the Mashrabiyya facade, which incorporates traditional Arabian architecture because they're geometric patterns. And it's a screen that includes over 1,000 elements that contract and expand. It's quite fascinating to watch, depending upon the position of the sun during the day. In England, in London, the Gherkin Swiss RE building, which was the first eco-friendly skyscraper, the building uses energy-saving methods which allow it to use half the power that a similar tower would typically consume. There are gaps in each floor that create 6 shafts that serve as a natural ventilation system. And in the summer, the shaft pulls the warm air out of the building, and then they warm the building in the winter with passive solar heating. And the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, again, the architects there designed the school with thousands of small sandblasted circles which are affixed to a central rod, and based on the humidity and the temperature inside the building, the rods pivot automatically to facilitate or block the flow of air through the facade. So with this in mind, I would like to encourage local developers and architects to take the time to incorporate more green sustainable features in their designs and therefore improve the quality of life of the people that will be living and working in their buildings, but also for the people living in the surrounding areas. And I'm sure that government would give some sort of incentive, I should say governments would give some sort of incentive to the developers to ensure that they build green. Finally, we come to the issue of the number of cars and congestion in Gibraltar. Now, in May 2011, the then government introduced a free bus service for many routes for local residents. And this was further improved with new routes by the present government. And in March this year, 2017, they produced a document which I think is excellent, which is a sustainable traffic transport and parking plan. And it covers all the areas that I want to see addressed, and yet we still have an ever-increasing amount of cars. I mean, we're virtually walking distance away from everywhere we need, and yet many of us insist on driving. I walk everywhere, or I take the bus, and I find it quite nice to be able to see people and talk to them on my way to my destination. But what can actually be done? Well, the way forward is obviously by reducing overall car use, while still allowing people to maintain their current lifestyles by ensuring that they can have access to a car when necessary. By moving away from the present situation of most families who have one car, and in Gibraltar, even more per household, to one where they can have the benefits of, as I said, of access to a car when they need it, but also by encouraging them to use other forms of transportation, walking, bicycles, buses, and so on. And in this way, people will be able to make decisions that will benefit their health, and it will benefit their finances and also the environment. It's a re-education of us. We need to be, and our minds need to change, and we need to see how best we can go about improving our lives. Some of the ideas which are happening in other countries, for example, the UK, are introducing car clubs, neighbourhood car rental schemes, car sharing, and an even more interesting one, which is pay-as-you-go insurance, which I'll tell you a little bit about. I was delighted to see just recently that the DPC was insisting on a car sharing scheme in one of the new proposed developments, and I would certainly encourage more of that. That's the new one that they're going to build at the Marina Bay at the end. They've made that one of the conditions that they have a car sharing scheme. And the pay-as-you-go insurance is basically very much like we pay as we go on mobile telephones. There would be like a basic charge of, 30, 40 pounds. And when you decide that you want to use the car, you then pay for the miles that you use on top of that amount of money, which I think is brilliant, because it means that people who may not use their cars very frequently would still be able to access cars when they require it, and at the same time not have to pay the costs that you would normally assume by owning a car or having to pay that. In conclusion, I've tried to offer what I think are some constructive and positive alternatives to assist us all in ensuring that our quality of life continues to be enhanced and maintained. And I hope you think these schemes are worthy of consideration and debate. Thank you very much for listening to me.